The autumn wind rattled the window panes of Benjamin Caldwell's study like a miner's pickaxe against stone. I mind that see by a dam. He sat at his mahogany desk, lamplight casting gold across ledger pages filled with numbers that represented his daughter's future. 7 mines. 12 investment portfolios. Trust funds calculated down to the penny. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room. Through the open doorway, he could hear soft footsteps in the dining room. Rose Murphy, the widow he'd hired 6 months ago as nurse and housekeeper, moved quietly between table and kitchen. Rikang. His daughter Sarah's lighter steps followed, carrying silverware that clinked like tiny bells. Is Papa coming? Sarah's voice drifted to him, small and hopeful. Benjamin's pen paused for half a heartbeat, then continued its march across the page. Investment yields from the Mountain Star Mine needed recalculating before tomorrow's meeting with Denver. Bankers, he's working, sweetheart. Rose answered, her Irish lilt gentle. For you. A pause. Then Sarah's voice again. Flatter now. He's always working for me. Benjamin tallied another column. The Silver Creek mine had produced well this quarter. Sarah's trust fund would reach $250,000 by her 18th birthday. No daughter of his would ever know poverty's cold grip. His wife Margaret had died when Sarah was barely 2. 7 years gone now. But the fear still haunted him. What if he left their daughter unprotected? What if he failed to provide? Every dollar saved was a shield against that terror. The dining room grew quiet. He glanced up briefly. Saw the table set for 3. Candles lit. Then back to his figures. Rose appeared in his doorway an hour later. Supper's ready. Mr. Caldwell. Leave a tray. I'll eat here. She hesitated. Sarah hoped you'd join us tonight. Tomorrow, perhaps. This Denver correspondence can't wait. Rose's expression shifted to something he couldn't quite read. Disappointment. Concern. She took the tray from the sideboard and set it beside his elbow. Without another word, he worked through the meal. Beef growing cold while he calculated shipping costs. The lamp burned steady, a faithful companion through another evening of securing his daughter's future. Near 9 o'clock. Small footsteps climbed the stairs. Sarah's voice called softly from the hallway. Good night, Papa. Good night, he called back, not looking up. The footsteps faded. The house settled into silence except for the wind in his pen. Later, much later, he heard Rose climbing the stairs to tuck Sarah in. Their voices murmured through the walls, Rose's soothing. Sarah's younger and sadder than a 9-year-old's should be. Benjamin signed the last letter, blotted it carefully, and leaned back in his chair. The lamp's reflection stared at him from the dark window. Beyond the glass, autumn had stripped the cottonwoods bare. Winter was coming. He'd survived 7 winters without Margaret. Sarah would survive too. Protected by the fortune he was building. She didn't understand yet. But someday she would. Someday she'd appreciate what all these hours had purchased for her. The lamp burned on. The closed door stayed closed. In the silence, he convinced himself this was enough. This was love. Rose stood in the upstairs hallway long after Sarah's breathing had steadied into sleep. Through the gap in the child's bedroom door, she could see the girl clutching a worn rag doll, the only toy in a room full of expensive things that Sarah never touched. The doll had been made by her mother's hands. Rose had heard the story from the housekeeper who'd worked here before her. Margaret Caldwell had stitched it during her final illness, fingers growing weaker with each seam. determined to leave her daughter something made with love instead of bought with money. Sarah slept with it every night. Rose touched the doorframe, remembering another child who'd clung to worn things after loss. Her own son, dead at 4 from scarlet fever. Her husband Patrick had worked himself into an early grave trying to outrun the grief, leaving Rose a widow at 32 with a shopkeeper's savings and an empty house. She recognized the pattern in Benjamin Caldwell, saw it in the lamplight burning late every night, the closed study door, the way he flinched when Sarah laughed too loud. He was drowning in purpose to avoid drowning in pain. Below, that damned lamp still glowed beneath his study door. Rose descended the stairs slowly, her conversation with Sarah replaying in her mind like a stuck music box. Rose, do you think if Papa was poor, like other girls' Papa, he'd have time to take me walking? The question had stopped Rose's hands mid-braid. What makes you say that, lamb? Sarah had stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. And the miners' daughters get to see their papas every day. They come home tired and dirty. But they come home. They eat together, tell stories. Papa eats in his study with his papers. Rose had tried to explain, to defend. But Sarah had kept talking. I wish Papa was poor. Then maybe he'd have time for me. Now Rose stood outside Benjamin's study near midnight. Her hand rose to knock, then fell. She was an employee, a widow dependent on this position and the room that came with it. I said what right did she have to speak truth to a man who paid her wages? But Sarah's face haunted her. That resigned sadness no child should wear. Rose straightened her spine, knocked once, and entered without waiting for permission. Benjamin looked up, startled. Mrs. Murphy, it's late. I must tell you something Sarah said tonight. I chi. His pen stopped. She saw his jaw tighten, but she'd come too far to retreat now. She repeated the conversation word for word, leaving nothing out. The wish for poverty, the longing for time, the quiet grief of a girl who'd lost both parents, one to death, one to ledgers. Benjamin's face hardened. She's a child. She doesn't understand the value of money. Rose finished quietly, or of time. I'm securing her future. His voice rose slightly. When I'm gone, she'll inherit your absence. The words came sharper than she intended, but she didn't soften them. Forgive me, Mr. Caldwell, but what will she remember when she's grown? The gold in her accounts, or the hours you weren't there? Haida stood, chair scraping. She'll appreciate it when she's older. She'll understand I did this out of love. Rose met his eyes across the desk. Why we sayo? Will she, or will she wonder why her father's ledgers mattered more than her laughter? She turned and left before he could respond. Before she could lose her courage or her position. Behind her, she heard him sink back into his chair. The lamp burned on. Benjamin stared at the ledger page, but the numbers had lost their shape. Inakusaistani. Rose's words echoed in the silence like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Erkomiger Ainti. What will she remember? He tried to return to the Denver correspondence. Tried to focus on yield percentages and shipping schedules. The pen felt heavy in his hand. What will she remember? He set the pen down and closed his eyes. Margaret's face rose in his memory, pale against the pillow. Breath rattling in her chest. Their daughter had been 2 years old, playing with wooden blocks in the hallway, while her mother died. Don't let grief make you a ghost. Benjamin, Margaret's voice had been barely a whisper. She needs a father, not a fortune. Promise me. He'd promised. Held her hand and promised. Then buried himself in mines and markets anyway. At first it had been necessary medical bills, funeral costs, hiring help to care for an infant while he worked. But necessity had become habit. Habit had become fortress. The work gave him purpose when nothing else made sense. Numbers didn't die. Investments didn't leave. Gold stayed solid when everything else turned to ash. Sarah's voice echoed from earlier. Good night, Papa. I sighed. She didn't say it with hope anymore. Just ritual. She no longer expected him to come. To tuck her in. To be there. Benjamin opened his eyes and looked at his lamp's reflection in the dark window. 7 years he'd kept vigil like this. 7 years burning lamplight in an empty room while his daughter grew up in the hallways beyond. Chan. Rose's question cut deeper than she knew. What will she remember? He stood and walked to Sarah's bedroom. The door stood slightly open. He eased it wider. Careful not to wake her. She lay curled on her side, the rag doll tucked under her chin. Moonlight through the window caught her dark hair, Margaret's hair. Her face peaceful in sleep, but tracks of dried tears marked her cheeks. When had she cried? During supper while he worked, after she called good night to a father who barely answered. He stepped closer. Drawn by something he couldn't name. Her small hand rested on the pillow. Fingers curled around the doll's worn fabric. That doll had cost nothing. Margaret had made it from scraps. Stitched it with thread salvaged from her sewing basket. Sarah treasured it, more than any expensive toy he'd ever bought. Benjamin backed out of the room silently. His chest felt tight. Breath coming shallow. In the hallway. He leaned against the wall and made a decision. Tomorrow he would join them for supper, sit at the table like a normal father. It was a small thing. Barely enough. But it was a start. He returned to his study and looked at the papers covering his desk. Letters to bankers. Mining report. Investment calculations. All of it suddenly felt thin as tissue. But old habits die hard. He sat and worked until 2 a.m, telling himself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he'd change. The lamp burned until dawn. Benjamin came to supper the next evening. Sarah's face lit up when he entered the dining room. Papa, you're here? I am. He took his seat at the head of the table, uncomfortable in the unaccustomed role. Rose served roasted chicken and potatoes. Her expression carefully neutral. Sarah chattered through the meal about the neighbor's new puppies, about the book Rose had read to her, about the frost patterns on the windows. Benjamin nodded at appropriate moments, but his mind kept drifting to the correspondence waiting in his study. The Denver bankers expected his response by Friday. He checked his pocket watch twice. Sarah's voice grew quieter each time. More chicken. Mr. Caldwell. Rose offered. No, thank you. I should return to... He caught himself at Sarah's falling face. That is, I have time for dessert. The smile that earned him felt like payment in gold. The next morning, he took Sarah for a walk before breakfast. She ran ahead on the path behind the house, collecting autumn leaves that caught her eye. Crimson oak. Golden aspen. Russet maple. Look, Papa. She pressed them into his hands. Each one a treasure. Aren't they beautiful? Very nice, he said, his thoughts already calculating shipping costs for the Mountain Star Mine's output. Laxinaburg. She held his hand as they walked back. He felt the small fingers in his palm and tried to be present. Tried to focus. But the numbers kept intruding. That afternoon, a telegram arrived. The defunct Silver Bell mine was being auctioned Saturday at 2 o'clock. The property sat on a rich vein that could double Sarah's inheritance if purchased at the right price. in Dorenengilai. Saturday at 2 o'clock, Rose found him studying the telegram in his study. Something important. A business opportunity. The Silver Bell auction. He set the paper down. Saturday afternoon. Her expression shifted. Saturday, Sarah's been practicing her piano piece all week. She's planning to perform it for you at 2 o'clock. The timing struck him like a fist. I see. Do you saw? Rose's voice stayed gentle, but her eyes held steel. She's been working so hard. Wants to surprise you. He looked at the telegram again. The Silver Bell could secure Sarah's future for generations. But Rose's earlier words haunted him. What will she remember? I'll think about it, he said finally. Rose left without commenting. That evening at supper, Sarah announced brightly. I'm almost ready. Papa, my piano piece. You'll come listen Saturday, won't you? Benjamin's throat tightened. We'll see, sweetheart. The light dimmed from her eyes. You always say that. After she'd gone to bed, he sat in his study holding the pressed leaves she'd given him that morning. They'd been buried under his correspondence, forgotten beneath papers about tonnage and profit margins. He smoothed one carefully. The crimson oak leaf. She'd chosen it specially. Pressed it into his palm with such joy, and he'd barely noticed. Rose's voice echoed. She needs you, not your money. Saturday loomed. The auction or the piano recital. Gold or moments. He placed the leaves carefully in his desk drawer. The first things he'd saved that weren't ledgers or certificates. Then he wrote a telegram declining the Silver Bell auction. Mesco. His hand shook slightly as he sealed the envelope. Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Benjamin sat on the piano bench beside his daughter. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as they hovered over the keys. I'm nervous. Papa. You'll do wonderfully. He meant it. His heart hammered strangely in his chest. She began to play. The piece was simple. Something about a meadowlark Rose had been teaching her, but Sarah's concentration was absolute. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth the way Margaret's used to when she focused. The notes weren't all perfect. She stumbled once, corrected, continued, but the melody rose sweet and clear in the afternoon light, and Benjamin felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed since Margaret died. The trachai, when the final notes faded. Sarah turned to him with luminous eyes. You stayed. Papa. I stayed. The words felt enormous. Terrifying. Right. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder. Baring? He held her, this small person he'd made with Margaret, and felt tears burn behind his eyes. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, he found Rose in the sitting room mending Sarah's winter coat by lamplight. She looked up as he entered but didn't speak. Thank you, he said. For what you said. For making me see. Aisa. Rose set down her sewing. I overstepped my position. No. He sat in the chair across from her. You told me the truth when no one else would. They talked then. Really talked. For the first time. She told him about Patrick, about their son Michael, about how grief had driven her husband to work 18-hour days at the shop until his heart gave out, how she'd been left with enough money, but nothing that mattered. I'd trade every dollar for one more Sunday walk, she said quietly. For one more evening with Michael on my lap. But time doesn't wait while we bargain with it. Benjamin shared memories of Margaret he hadn't spoken aloud in years. How she'd laughed at his terrible jokes. How she'd made their small house a home. How he'd promised not to become a ghost and then broken that promise every day since. "I've been so afraid," he admitted, "that if I stop working, stop building, I'll have to feel—" His voice broke. The loss," Rose finished gently. "But Benjamin, you're already living in loss. You've just numbed yourself to it." Snow began falling outside. Sarah's delighted squeal carried from upstairs where she'd pressed her face to the bedroom window. "Papa! Papa! Come see." He looked at Rose. She smiled. "Go." He climbed the stairs, found Sarah bouncing with excitement. "Can we build a snowman? Please." The ledgers in his study called to him. Investment reports needed reviewing, but Sarah's face shone with such hope. "Get your coat," he said. They built the snowman in the front garden while neighbors watched with surprise. Benjamin Caldwell, the mining king, on his knees in the snow helping his daughter pack the body. It leaned slightly. The carrot nose sat crooked. Sarah used coal chips from the scuttle for eyes and buttons. "He's perfect," she declared. Benjamin looked at their creation lopsided. Already melting in spots. Ridiculous. "He really is." Sarah's laughter rang across the white lawn. She grabbed his hand and they danced around the snowman like fools while snow fell on their hair and shoulders. Rose watched from the window, smiling. That night, tucking Sarah in, Benjamin read to her from her favorite book. She fell asleep holding his hand. He sat there a long time after, watching her breathe, feeling time move differently. Not like an enemy anymore, more like a gift he'd been refusing to open. The telegraph arrived on a Tuesday in early December. Panic, spreading. Stop banks. Tightening. Credit. Stop Mountain Star. Mine flooded. Stop. Advise. Immediate. Return. Stop. Benjamin read it 3 times in the hallway, while Sarah practiced her piano in the next room. The melody faltered when she saw his face. "Papa, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Keep practicing." But it wasn't nothing. By evening, more telegrams came. The panic of 1884 had struck the financial markets like a blizzard. Banks were calling in loans. Investors were fleeing mining stocks. And the Mountain Star, his most profitable holding, had hit an underground river and flooded 3 levels. Not Gistzad. Rose found him in his study at midnight, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. The lamp burned bright. The door was closed. It had been closed for 5 nights. "You're doing it again," she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. "The Mountain Star is flooding. If I can't secure emergency credit, I'll lose it entirely. And the panic means all my Denver investments are collapsing. So you've locked yourself away." "I'm trying to save what Sarah will need." His voice came out harder than intended. "I can't just let everything dissolve. She needs you, not your money. She needs both." He stood, knocking papers to the floor. You don't understand the finances. If I don't fix this, if I lose the mines, she'll have nothing." Rose stepped into the room. "She already has nothing. She has a ghost for a father again." And the words hit like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, but she kept speaking. "For 3 weeks you were present. You laughed with her. Built snowmen. Read stories. She bloomed like a flower in spring. Rose's voice shook. Now you've disappeared again. And she knows. Children always know. I'm doing this for her. Are you doing it for yourself? Rose's eyes blazed. Using the panic as an excuse to hide back in your fortress of numbers where nothing can hurt. Benjamin felt rage and shame war in his chest. Get out! Benjamin. I said get out. She left. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a gunshot. He sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. The lamp burned. The numbers mocked him from every page. He'd tried to change and failed. Failed Margaret. Failed Sarah. Failed himself. Upstairs. He heard Sarah crying softly. Then Rose's voice, gentle and soothing, singing an Irish lullaby. He worked until dawn, calculating losses, drafting desperate letters to bankers. When Sarah came down for breakfast, he was still in his study. She didn't knock, didn't call goodbye when Rose took her to the neighbor's house for the afternoon. The silence felt like judgment. By the end of the week, he'd barely slept, barely eaten. The panic was easing slightly. He'd secured enough credit to keep the Mountain Star operational during repairs, but the damage to Sarah felt irreparable. He'd proven Rose right, given a crisis. He'd retreated immediately to the only safety he knew. Gold over moments. Every time. The lamp burned. The door stayed closed. And somewhere in the house above, his daughter learned again that her father's love was conditional on financial security. Sarah's fever started on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Rose sent for Benjamin near midnight. Yestal ahama bafmaya. He stumbled from his study, eyes burning from ledger work, and found his daughter thrashing in bed, skin hot as coals. The doctor's been, Rose said quietly. It's not serious, but she's weak, sad. He said, sometimes sadness makes children sick. Benjamin sank into the chair beside Sarah's bed. The girl's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. In her fever, she called out. Small broken sounds. Mama! Mama! Where are you? Not Papa. Never Papa. The doctor had left medicine but said time and care mattered most. Benjamin sent Rose to sleep, promising to keep watch, alone with his daughter in the lamplight. He held her small hand and felt the weight of 7 years crushing his chest. All his money couldn't cure heartache. Sarah woke near dawn. Fever-glazed eyes opening. She stared at him for a long moment, confused. Papa! Her voice came out hoarse. Are you real? Or am I dreaming? The question shattered him. His own daughter didn't expect him to be there, even sick, even needing him. She assumed he'd be in his study with his ledgers. I'm real, sweetheart. I'm here. She tried to smile, but exhaustion pulled her back under. Her hand stayed in his, trusting even in sleep. Benjamin sat there as winter dawn crept through the window. Sat there while shame and grief finally broke through the dam he'd built from gold and fear. Rose came in with broth near noon. Sarah was sleeping peacefully now, fever broken. Rose set the tray down and studied his face. You look terrible. I feel worse. He couldn't look at her. You were right. About everything. Rose pulled up the other chair. For a while they sat in silence, watching Sarah breathe. Finally, Rose spoke. My Patrick worked himself to death because he couldn't face a world without our son. I watched him disappear into his shop, into his ledgers, into anything that kept him from feeling. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late. She touched his arm gently. You have time, Benjamin. You can still choose differently. Or, what if I can't? What if I keep failing? Then you keep trying. That's what love is. Not perfection. Just trying. Sarah stirred, opened her eyes. Papa's still here. Still here. He promised, not going anywhere. And over the next week, as Sarah recovered, Benjamin made decisions that felt like jumping off cliffs. He sold 2 mines, the Silver Creek and the Copper Ridge, kept the Mountain Star and 2 smaller holdings, but hired managers to run them, restructured his entire business around reasonable hours and actual presence. The financial advisors in Denver wrote letters full of concern. He burned them. Sarah grew stronger, started smiling again. On Christmas Eve, she helped Rose bake cookies while Benjamin read reports in the sitting room, not the study, and only for an hour before joining them in the kitchen. That night, he opened the study door and left it open. The lamp still burned, but now it illuminated connection instead of isolation. He watched Rose with Sarah, saw how gentle she was, how patient, saw how Sarah reached for her instinctively, called her name first when excited or scared. She'd been mother to Sarah in every way that mattered, asking nothing in return. And Benjamin realized he didn't just need her for Sarah's sake. He needed her for his own. Her wisdom, her strength, her willingness to speak truth when it hurt. He was falling in love with the widow who'd saved his life by refusing to let him waste it. But did he have the courage to ask her to stay? Not as an employee, as family. Winter held its breath, waiting. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and Sarah's delighted shrieks. They decorated the small pine tree together, not with expensive ornaments from Denver shops, but with paper chains Sarah cut and glued. With popcorn strings, Rose taught them to thread. Benjamin's fingers fumbled with the needle. Sarah giggled at his crooked stitching. Rose smiled and showed him how to pierce the kernels without breaking them. The tree looked ridiculous when finished. Lopsided strings, uneven chains, a tin star bent at one point. It was the most beautiful thing Benjamin had ever seen. That evening, after a simple supper of roast goose and potatoes, he asked Sarah to sit with him by the fire. I have an important question, he said seriously. Her eyes went wide. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. The opposite. He took her small hands in his. If you could have anything for Christmas, anything in the world, what would you wish for? Sarah thought carefully, the way she did about important things. Not a pony. Not if you don't want one. Not fancy dresses or dolls from Paris. Not if those aren't what matters. She looked at him with Margaret's eyes, old beyond her years. I'd wish for us to stay like this, together, happy. I'd wish for you to keep being here. Papa. That's all I want. His throat closed. Not my money. Not the inheritance I've been building. Sarah shook her head. I have everything if I have you. Of course, the lesson he'd spent 7 years refusing to learn landed like a blessing. Legacy wasn't what you left behind. It was what you lived now. Inheritance wasn't gold in accounts. It was memory, love, time given freely. He pulled Sarah into his arms and held her tight. You've taught me something precious. Little one. Something I should have known all along. After he tucked her into bed, he found Rose in the kitchen finishing the dishes. Snow fell past the window, soft and steady. Rose. His voice came out rougher than intended. Could we talk? She dried her hands and followed him to the sitting room. They sat by the dying fire, close enough their shoulders almost touched. You've been part of this family for months now, he began. Been mother to Sarah in every way that matters. Patient when I was foolish. Truthful when I needed truth. I've been a blind man stumbling in the dark. and you've been light. Rose waited, her expression unreadable. Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold wedding band he'd worn for 7 years. I loved Margaret with everything I had. Losing her nearly destroyed me. I thought the only way to honor her memory was to build Sarah a fortune so vast she'd never need anyone. He turned the ring in his fingers, lamplight catching the worn gold. But that wasn't honoring Margaret. That was hiding from grief, from life, from the future. He looked at Rose directly. Margaret wanted Sarah to have a father who was present. A father who chose moments over money. I failed that for 7 years, but you helped me find my way back. Rose's eyes glistened with tears she didn't shed. I'm not asking you to replace her. No one could. But I'm asking you to join us. Not as an employee, not out of convenience. He set the old ring aside and took both her hands in his. I'm asking because I love you. Rose Murphy, because Sarah loves you. Because you've already been our family in your heart. His voice dropped to a whisper. Will you marry me? Make this official. Be my wife and Sarah's mother in truth as well as practice. Roses. Tears spilled over then. She laughed through them. A sound like spring water. I thought you'd never ask. You stubborn fool. Is that a yes? That's a yes. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then. Gentle and reverent. While snow fell outside and the lamp burned warm. Upstairs. Sarah slept peacefully, secure in love, when they finally pulled apart. Rose whispered, "Oh, what will you do with Margaret's ring? Keep it for Sarah? So she knows her mother's love? So she has something made with more than money?" He smiled. You taught me that. The rag doll. The pressed leaves. The crooked snowman. Those are the inheritances that matter. They sat by the fire until it burned to embers. Planning a simple wedding. Dreaming of the life ahead. Outside, winter began its slow turn toward spring. They married in early March when the first crocuses pushed through melting snow. The ceremony was small. Held in the white church at the edge of town. No grand affair with Denver society. Just neighbors. A few miners from the Mountain Star. The doctor who'd tended Sarah's fever. Sarah stood between them in a new blue dress, holding both their hands as the minister spoke the words that made them official. When he pronounced them, husband and wife, Sarah squeezed their fingers tight. Now we're really a family, she whispered. Rose knelt and gathered her into a hug. We've been a family for a long time. Lamb. This just makes it official. Benjamin watched them, his wife and daughter, and felt peace settle into his bones like warmth after long cold. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Benjamin worked reasonable hours at a small office in town, leaving the mine management to capable foremen. He came home for dinner every evening, read to Sarah every night. On Sundays, the three of them walked to the edge of town, where wildflowers were starting to bloom. Sarah grew confident, joyful. Her laughter filled the house like music. She and Rose planted a garden together, teaching Benjamin about seeds and soil. He proved hopeless at gardening, but wonderful at listening to their plans. The study transformed. Benjamin kept it for essential paperwork, but the door stayed open. The lamp burned only during evening hours. A gentle light that welcomed, rather than isolated. Sarah's artwork covered the hallway walls now. Rose's sewing basket sat by the sitting room window. Muddy boots lined up by the front door, his large ones. Rose's smaller. Sarah's smallest. Signs of life. Of family. Of home. One spring evening, Benjamin sat on the porch while Sarah played in the garden with the neighbor's puppies. Rose settled beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "Any regrets?" she asked. About the mines you sold, the fortune you gave up." He watched Sarah laugh as a puppy licked her face, joy radiating from her like sunlight. "Not a single one." He meant it with every fiber of his being. "It turns out time's the only gold worth mining. Everything else is just metal and stone." Rose kissed his cheek. "You've learned your lesson well." "I none." Sarah ran up the porch steps, mud on her dress, grass in her hair. "Papa, come see what I found in the garden." A robin's nest with eggs. And Benjamin stood immediately, taking her outstretched hand. No hesitation. No checking his pocket watch. No thinking of ledgers waiting. "Show me, sweetheart." They went together. Sarah chattering about the nest's location. How carefully they'd have to watch to see the babies hatch. Rose followed, smiling, later that night, after Sarah was asleep. Benjamin walked through the quiet house. He paused at the study doorway, looking at the lamp burning softly inside. Papers sat neatly stacked on the desk, 1 hour's work. Completed and set aside. He could have kept going. Could have spent the evening calculating and corresponding. Instead, he turned toward the stairs where Rose waited, where Sarah slept peacefully, where life happened in the spaces between numbers. The lamp in the window cast its glow across the porch and garden. Not a fortress light anymore. A welcome. A beacon saying home is here. Love lives here. Time is cherished here. 3 pairs of boots sat by the door, large, medium, small. A family. Benjamin Caldwell had spent 7 years building a fortune for his daughter's future. In the end, Rose Murphy had taught him the only fortune that mattered was the present moment. Lived fully. Shared completely. Sarah would inherit enough money for security, but her real inheritance was richer than gold memories of a father who chose her over ledgers, of building crooked snowmen and watching robins' nests, of daily walks and nightly stories. She would remember love that showed up, love that stayed, love that valued time as the truest wealth. And when she grew old enough to understand, she would know that sometimes the greatest fortune comes not from hoarding, but from letting go. Not from building walls of gold, but from opening doors to light. But cosbest wakam ma twas. The lamp burned gentle in the window, welcoming them home to each other. Spring had come at last.